Mr. Cedric Foo.
Speaker, sir, I have some supplementary questions for Minister for MCI. I recall that he talked about 3 parallel investigations, the COI, the Personal Data Protection Commission, as well as the police. Can he update on the last of this, whether there's any criminal findings?
Mr. Speaker, there are 3 streams of activity. One was the COI, the report of which has been furnished. Second was the investigations by the PDPC, which was to be informed by the COI's work, which it has done and now concluded with the penalties that have been meted out. And thirdly was the investigation by the CID, which has been closed without any further action.
Mr. Chris D'Souza.
I thank both ministers for their thorough statements. Recommendation number 4 of the COI states, enhanced security checks must be performed, especially on critical information infrastructure systems. My question is, what is the accountability mechanism for this? Essentially, who will regulate cybersecurity officers to ensure such checks are up to a professional standard and performed regularly? Further, what is the professional standard we are pegging the expectation to, and how regularly will security checks be undertaken? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question. The mechanisms and the framework for doing such audits and compliance is actually set up under the Cybersecurity Act, and CSA, which has oversight of the overall national cybersecurity effort, and in particular the work that is being done by the critical information infrastructure owners in the 11 vertical sectors, will be the one that oversees the execution and compliance, if you will, of the processes that are needed to continually strengthen our cybersecurity system. And in that regard, CSA issues various directives and advisories from time to time. There is a code of practice that CII owners are expected to adhere to. There is provisions for regular audits, minimally once in 2 years, but if not, it can be more frequent if mandated or required by CSA. And also the audit will be conducted by an auditor that must be approved by the Cybersecurity Agency. So we have a framework in place. As I pointed out, these have all been enabled with the legislation coming into force in August last year. And now we are, having designated the CII, CSA is operationalizing it, and we have a mechanism to follow through on the broader imperatives that CSA has mapped out, but also on the implementation of some of the COI recommendations.
Professor Lim San San.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the 2 ministers for their illuminating statements. On the issue of the internet surfing separation, I think it's encouraging that we're exploring the virtual browser option. But at the same time, I wonder if during the exercise of the internet surfing separation, whether there were instances of healthcare workers using their personal devices and data plans to access the internet for work purposes, and whether such practices introduce security risks, and if in future there will be safeguards to caution healthcare workers against these kinds of actions.
Thank you very much. Indeed, some of the healthcare professionals have taken the initiative to use their own personal devices to access internet for work, and these are monitored. But because their personal devices are not connected to the intranet, to our data system, and therefore they are less risky from a system's point of view. Whereas our own internal intranet system we have imposed ISS on our own internal system, and therefore our own internal system will have no access to internet for surfing purposes.
Ms. Rayu Mazam.
Speaker, I have a question for the Minister for Communications and Information. I appreciate that the cybersecurity regime and ecosystem is a relatively new frontier, and I'm just wondering, as part of our review and assessments, whether we look to other practices and systems in other countries and whether we benchmark ourselves against the technological capabilities as well as rigor and practices in those countries.
Speaker, the answer is yes. Obviously, because it's a highly interconnected world that we live in a sense, whilst we do what we can in our own jurisdiction, we also have to take reference from what is happening elsewhere. And indeed, that's why cybersecurity agencies across the world form these partnerships to share intelligence and also to share best practices, because the threat is an evolving one. And I think that is the way we continue to ensure that we are plugged in. And so I think the short answer to the member's question is yes, we do. But having said that, I think the onus is on us to ensure that we are up to mark. And I would add that many countries look to Singapore for best practice as well.
So Vikram Nair.
I thank the ministers for the comprehensive replies and the report, which I think has been a very good learning experience for all of us. But the one elephant in the room, of course, is the decision was made not to name the perpetrator. And I have two questions related to this. First of all, what actions, if any, can we take against the perpetrators of such attacks? And if the answer to this is none at the moment, can we change our domestic laws at least so that if any of these perpetrators are within our jurisdiction, we can take action against them?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question. If I may reiterate my earlier response, we know the identity of the perpetrator. We have taken appropriate action, but it's not in our interest to make a public attribution. And it's not because we lack the legislative capacity to do so, if indeed it is within our jurisdiction.
Mr. Chiashilu.
Thank you. I also want to echo my thanks to both ministers and also to the COI for their work. Three questions directed to the Minister for Health. The first, while we are trying to strengthen the systems, if we take a leaf from how we manage infectious diseases, while we are trying to think of better treatments and so on, I think a key focus would be surveillance. That means detection and containment. So there was some talk about the advanced threat protection and other systems to detect the systems. And as I know it, our healthcare system has hundreds of computer systems, not just in SingHealth and also in the private sector. Could I just ask what is the extent to which these detection systems have been deployed throughout the national healthcare system, just to get an idea? Because there are other healthcare systems out there that could still be vulnerable and may not have these systems. I just want to have an idea about that. The second is that there was a point in the COI about that they were going to, which merit study, which is the impact on patient care. Can I also find out what has been the work of the Ministry of Health in looking at the impact that this cyber attack has had on patient care efficacy and efficiency? And third, I'm also concerned about the impact on the rollout of NEHR. So I think it's something that's very useful, and I think something that we should all have is for the future of Singapore healthcare. So in terms of the study on the NEHR, could I get a sense of what sort of goals we're looking at in terms of the assessment of whether or not NEHR would be safe in terms of cybersecurity threats and so on, so that maybe we have an idea how long this may be delayed. So just these three questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, as I've explained earlier in my speech, the advanced threat protection has been implemented in our healthcare system generally. So I think it is there to protect, to help us detect potential malicious activities. But for the private sector, it's something that we will have to work with them and see what will be applicable for them. But it is also important for us to always remember, whatever system we put in, there will always be the risk of exposure. The risk, I think, the greatest risk for us is to assume that after putting in the Advanced Threat Protection or ISS, we are quite safe and therefore we let our guards down. So we always must remember, 道高一尺，魔高一丈. We must always be on alert and assume that we are being attacked all the time and be vigilant and get to know what is the latest development, what's the latest landscape, and continually upgrade ourselves to make sure that we are ready for them as best we can. So I think this is a lesson we learned from this incident. And Dr. Shah also asked about the impact because of this incident. Some patient care, some processes has been slowed down because of additional steps that they have to go through. But by and large, we have not compromised the quality of care, and particularly in patient safety, we have been quite conscious about this, and I've always reminded our cluster leadership to make sure that despite all the additional cybersecurity measures, we cannot compromise on patient safety. So far, I think it has been going on all right. On NEHR, I agree with Dr. Chia that we don't want to delay it unnecessarily, but given that it is a very large system and very important national system, we want to be extra cautious to have it tested and tested again before we make it mandatory. And we foresee that we'll probably be able to complete our review within this year, and then we can make a decision at the end of this year to see when we are ready to implement them. But because the process is still ongoing, this is an indicative timeline, and we'll probably give an update nearer the time.
Mr. Murali Pillay.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I have a question for the Honourable Minister for Health in relation to the relationship between IHIS and SingHealth, and for that matter, the other healthcare clusters. I note that the PDPC had fined SingHealth in its capacity as a data controller. But IHIS, which is owned by MOHH, is a nominated agency to deal with IT matters for all healthcare clusters. So how would these two entities work to strike a balance between operational needs on one hand and to maintain cybersecurity on the other hand? Would they work as equal partners, or would there be another arbiter to deal with any differences between these agencies?
Sir, I explained in my speech significant reorganization of IHIS, the cluster IT organization, as well as MOH. Let me just quickly focus on the questions that you raised. Particularly within the cluster, currently the Group Chief Information Officer, GCIO, is a IHIS staff. And therefore, there is a question as to does he have sufficient resources? Does he report to IHIS, or does he report to the cluster? So we have made it clear now that the Group Chief Information Officer, GCIO, in the clusters will report to the board and the management of the cluster. So he may be a secondee from IHIS, he may be a direct recruit, he may be someone that is loaned to the cluster, but his responsibility and accountability is toward the cluster. So this provides the cluster some independence from IHIS as a system operator. And particularly on security, the cluster Information Security Officer, CISO, now reports directly to the management, doesn't even report to the Group Chief Information Officer. So security and operation now has a separate reporting line, and this also provides significant independence between security considerations as well as operational requirements. Within MOH, I mentioned that we are going to set up a separate Group Security Information Officer, an office, which will report directly to the Permanent Secretary, and this will also be quite separate from IHIS Cyber Defense Group. So I think with the separation of roles between these, a few key functions will provide greater independence and check and balance between operational needs and cybersecurity needs.
Mr. Peng Eng Huat.
Thank you, Speaker. This is for Minister Iswaran. Okay, the public version of the COI report is comprehensive on the technical facts of the cyber attack and also recommendation to prevent a repeat of such incident. But it has fallen short on damage control for the victims of the cyber attack. See, imagine if someone were to receive email, SMS, and now possibly a hard copy letter purportedly from SingHealth or even the cybersecurity agency, stating his name, NRIC, date of birth, gender, race, to name some of the stolen data, and asking that unsuspecting person to call or to go online to verify some information because someone has given him wrong medication or on some innocuous matter, life is going to be hell. Because life is going to be hell for this person if he were to make the first contact and fall victim to the scam. So my first question is, in the aftermath of the cyber attack, why did CSA say there is no strong commercial value for such data when the danger for loss of privacy and financial for victims of this cyber attack is clear and present? To summarize, what is the government going to do to next to assure and alert this group of victims about such danger? Because telling the victim to make a police report is rather moot after they suffer financial and privacy loss, because it's very difficult to investigate cross-border cybercrime.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question. I think it's a reasonable concern. Let me start by saying that in the aftermath of the incident, CSA and other agencies have been monitoring the dark web to see whether the data that has been exfiltrated has emerged in any form, and to date there's been no evidence of that. Secondly, the kind of scenarios that the member has highlighted about people being approached for personal data and so on and to verify, these actually have been occurring even before the cyber attack, and they occur in different contexts. Because the way some of these scams, as the member put it, are being perpetrated, it's not just depending on this particular kind of incident. They're approaching it from different angles, using different resources at their disposal. So, on the one hand, we are doing everything we can and taking it absolutely seriously that this has been an incident that we should never have allowed to happen, but it having happened, we want to contain it and ensure that every measure is put in place to protect the interests of the patients. So if you recall, SingHealth has made an extensive outreach to all the patients through SMSs, etc., to inform them and also to advise them of the risks and what they need to do and why they can be assured in terms of the security of their data. The second point I would make is we have been emphasizing, not just CSA, but I think that the government as a whole, that whether it is this incident or any others, we have, each and every one of us, an obligation to exercise appropriate cyber hygiene habits. And that means if you have an unsolicited call citing personal data or seeking personal data, then I think our antennae should go up and we should be taking appropriate steps to ensure that this is a bona fide approach and not something that is, obviously a scam that is trying to take advantage of us. So I think it's first, and if I can summarize it, overall the data, we are monitoring the situation. There's no evidence to date in terms of its use or emergence in the dark web. Secondly, our agencies, and specifically in this case SingHealth, has reached out to all the patients to inform, advise, and also where they've had queries, they've been able to approach SingHealth. And thirdly, we have a general and important and repeated advisory on appropriate cyber hygiene habits that should be undertaken by all of us.
Mr. Patrick Day.
I have two questions for the Minister for Health. Firstly, I would wish to ask the Minister for Health if IHIS, which is a unionized company of the Healthcare Services Employees Union, has been notified and heard before taking action and meting out punishments to the affected employees, because this is regardless of whether they are or not union members. Secondly, with regards to the financial penalty of 1 million imposed by the PDPC on SingHealth and iHIS, I urge and appeal that the salaries and bonus of the workers in both organizations will not be affected as a result.
Sir, I do not know whether they have informed the union. I will inform the management. I agree with Mr. Patrick Tay that I think it's a good practice whenever these incidents happen and we have to take disciplinary action. It's best to keep the unions informed. And I don't know whether there are union members, and if they are, I think the management would be useful for the management to keep them informed. And if they have not done so, it's still not too late. Better to do now than not to do so. Secondly, you asked about the bonuses of the iHIS staff and SingHealth staff. I think other than those that I mentioned as part of the disciplinary action, the rest of the staff should not be affected. They should continue to do well, and they should continue to do to get what they deserve. And for those who have done well, and their contributions will be recognized at the end of the year. Thank you.
Dr. Lilino.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'd like to declare that I'm a medical practitioner. May I seek clarification from Minister for Health on the implementations on the recommendations he mentioned earlier? Will MOH also assist private practitioners in coping with this cyber attack, especially those already embarking on the NHR or National Electronic Health Record? My concern is on cyber attack on the NHR in the private sector that will be linked to the public sectors. So if there's a soft part in this area, will that affect the whole public sector in the end? So I also like to echo Dr. Chasilu's question earlier, whether Minister will ensure that the NHR is robust before it's widely implemented to give confidence to patients and to doctors. Thank you.
Sir, I agree with Dr. Neo that it's important for us to ensure that the NHR is robust before we make it mandatory for data submission. And Dr. Neo also mentioned how can we help the private sector doctors, particularly if they are connected to the NHR. Indeed, we are aware that there is risk because we have many private operators which have to tap onto our NHR in order to submit their data, and that is why we are taking additional precaution to test our NHR cyber defenses to ensure that they are robust before we require everyone to submit. At the same time, we will also be developing advisory to help advise our private practitioners how to strengthen their system, how to do audit on their system to ensure that their own systems are protected. You must remember that even without any HR, many of our doctors have their own data system, keeping their own patient records. Of course, these are limited to their own patients, not the national data, but nevertheless, it is also important for our private doctors to ensure that the patient data that they collect and maintain are protected from potential cyber attacks. In the past, our doctors may be using paper and pen. They have paper card records. It's less risky, but it is still the sense of responsibility to safekeep this data is there among our medical practitioners. I think it is no different when it comes to electronic records. When doctors have their records kept in an electronic form, they should be quite mindful that they are also responsible to ensure that such electronic records within their own premises that they kept, they also have to ensure that they are protected to a satisfactory extent. So I think we will help them. We will give them advice from time to time, especially arising from this incident. We will give them a general advice of what they ought to do to ensure that their databases are protected.
Ms. Arinkwi.
I thank both ministers for their detailed statement. While we understand that there are deficiencies and will be implementing comprehensive recommendations, we must not forget that our iHIS staff have been working very hard and performing their best over the years as we move towards a smart nation. So can I ask, what are the resources as we are piling them up with more recommendations and more work, as well as emotional support that we are rendering to this ground IHIF staff while they are going through this trying period to boost their morale as we learn and move forward stronger together in this smart nation journey? Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank the member for her encouragement. Indeed, IHIS has been working very hard over the last few years in reorganizing itself, strengthening its governance, as well as rolling out many major systems. But this is an important incident, and it's a very critical and regrettable incident. And therefore, IHIS morale, staff morale, has indeed taken a toll on this incident, and we will continue to support them, as I mentioned in my speech, even as they go through the reorganization, going through the repositioning, reprioritizing. MOH and all our clusters will extend our full support for them, and we want to encourage them to continue to soldier on, because there's still many important tasks ahead of us, and not the least the implementation of the recommendations of the COI. And on top of that, there are still many systems that they have to deliver, and they have to deliver it with strong cybersecurity measures. So I thank the member for her encouragement. I will convey this to the IHIS team and to encourage them to press on with that task. Thank you.
Mr. Cedric Foo.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I kind of empathize with my colleague's view about the perpetrator and the identity of the perpetrator. I think it seems that the process has been very robust. The COI has been thorough, rigorous, public, transparent, open. I think this will go some ways to restore public confidence on the incident itself. Recommendations strengthening the fence, the vault, and everything. But how about the person who actually broke into the house? There seems to be a vacuum as far as the sense of justice. I'm sure the calibration was well considered, but perhaps the Minister can share more on the considerations of the government of not revealing who the perpetrator is.
Mr. Speaker, I think the member's question, if I can put it in a broader context. First, this incident has occurred, and I think the basic question we've got to ask ourselves is, how do we ensure that Singaporeans continue to have trust and confidence in our public sector systems, IT systems and databases? Because it's inevitable when you have an incident like this, it will raise such qualms and questions. And I would say that in deriving a sense of confidence, our citizens should be looking at the totality of our response and not focus on one particular aspect of the response. And let me elaborate by what I mean. Firstly, why do we collect data and have these IT systems? Because they enable all these services, conveniences that we take for granted, whether it is in our transportation system, our healthcare system, in our dealings with various other government agencies. The fact that we can transact with ease and convenience is because it is enabled by data and IT systems that we have. So, firstly, we are doing this because we want to serve the interests of citizens. The second point I would make is, directly as a result of this, we should be looked at in terms of what is our response been, government's response to this. And in that regard, I would highlight a few things. Firstly, we made the knowledge of the cyber attack public within days. If I recall correctly, 10 days after it was brought to the attention of CSA. I think it was the 10th of July that was brought to the attention of CSA, and on the 20th of July, we had a press conference, Minister Gan and I, and we announced it and shared it with members of the public. Why do we do that? Because we want to demonstrate that we are transparent, and we want to ensure that all Singaporeans understand that we've got nothing to hide here. We want to get to the bottom of it as much as Singaporeans do. Thirdly, if you look at our response thereafter, we appointed a committee of inquiry. Why do we appoint a committee of inquiry? Because the government wants a robust and transparent investigation and inquiry into the matter. Not because we want to lay fault, although if there are those who have committed or have been negligent, who have been egregious, then they have to be held accountable. But also because we want to learn from this, understand what went wrong, and rectify and build. And so if you look at the COI report, we have released all the recommendations and findings in full in the public version. The only part that's been held back are those that pertain to sensitive national security matters and also patient confidentiality. Everything else is out there, unvarnished, stark, but very clear on what we need to get done. So again, I think if you contrast what we have done with the responses in other domains by different parties, I think we can hold ourselves up to the best practices and standards in terms of how we've responded. And finally, what is the actions we have taken? Apart from actions against individuals, we have taken actions against the organizations, and we have also undertaken a slew of activities and measures in order to further strengthen our cybersecurity system. Some informed by the COI, others that our agencies have already been working on. So that is the totality of our response. And I don't think we should reduce whether we have confidence and a sense of justice to just one specific point, that there's no public attribution of the perpetrator. I can understand that members have a desire, and on behalf of their constituents, to know this, but I think we have to exercise judgment. What is in our national interest, and whether a public attribution serves our best interests. And as I said, we know who the perpetrator is. Appropriate action has been taken.